More than 30 years ago, the lives of two young friends were taken, viciously stabbed and shot to death.
They were targeted to be killed, and there was no other reason to be in the apartment that we could tell.
Local 15's Darwin Singleton examines this 35-year-old cold case murder in his latest Friday night mystery. What's up next?
In the prime of their lives, two young men with good jobs, lots of friends, and not a care in the world until someone invaded their apartment and viciously stabbed and shot them to death.
That was in 1982. Now, more than 3 decades later, cold case detectives are renewing their search for the killer.
Darwin Singleton revisits the case in tonight's Friday Night Mystery.
A clear view. It's an attraction for those living in Mobile's Clearview apartments, perched on a hillside off Azalea Road, overlooking the city's Airmont neighborhood. But on the night of February 7th, 1982, the view that greeted Mobile's homicide detectives was anything but clear.
This was a double murder.
And, says MPD cold case detective Rusty Hardiman, it was personal.
They were targeted to be killed, and there was no other reason to be in the apartment that we could tell.
The box that holds the 35-year-old murder case of 22-year-old John Self and 21-year-old Greg Eady is filled with pictures of the two, but unfortunately none that we can show you on television because the crime was just too violent.
Both victims were stabbed multiple times, and both victims were also shot, which that tends to be a personal murder. There was no indication that it was a robbery.
We do know that 35 years ago, life was good for these two friends. The Davidson High School grads both worked for a local beer distributing company and shared the apartment.
They weren't involved in any kind of criminal activity that we know of. There's no evidence of any drug use or selling drugs or anything along those lines. They would go bowling on the weekend and play poker with their friends and have a good time.
In spite of the horrific scene, evidence was limited. 1982 was well before DNA evidence was collected or even possible. For the most part, the pieces of evidence were the bodies themselves. And then detectives made another discovery, something that allowed investigators to pinpoint when the murders took place. While covering a fire earlier in the day at a nearby Bruno's grocery store, local news cameras picked up images of one of the victims' cars in the parking lot. Investigators believe the killer drove it there after finishing his gruesome crime.
So we know that the victims were killed much earlier in the day than they were discovered.
The murders of good friends John Self and Greg Eady still haunt their families and detectives who investigated this crime 35 years ago. Hardiman hopes it haunts someone else too, someone that the killer may have told about his horrific deed.
That's exactly who I'm looking for. I'm looking for the person that when they hear John Self or Greg Eady, it makes them cringe on the inside. I'm looking for the person who when they see this, they're going to have a nightmare about it because they know what happened.
For Friday Night Mysteries, I'm Darwin Singleton, Local 15 News.
If you have any information that could help solve this case, Detective Rusty Hardiman wants you to call him at Mobile Police Headquarters. His number is right there on your screen, 208-1810.
Join us next Friday for another Friday Night Mystery right here on Local 15.